Good evening, everyone. My name is Tom Begley. I am the special project writer at Plymouth Patuxet Museums, coordinator for our publication arm, Plymouth Patuxet Press, and project manager for this exciting book that we'll be discussing tonight. It's really exciting to have you all here. And on behalf of Plymouth Patuxet Museums and the State Library of Massachusetts, we thank you all for being here, and we're thrilled to present this new edition of William Bradford's of Plimoth Plantation. William Bradford was born in 1590 and died in 1657. His life was filled with adventure. He was a passenger on the Mayflower, which arrived here in the Wampanoag homeland in 1620. As Plymouth Colony's longest-serving governor, Bradford had a close view on the many events in the colony's development. His history of Plymouth Plantation details the major events in the lives of a small group of religious separatists that we know as the Pilgrims, who set out from England to seek the religious freedom that was not available to them back home. Bradford presents in manuscript format the authoritative account of the Mayflower voyage, relationships with 17th century indigenous communities, and the settling of what would become the first permanent European colony in New England, using the Mayflower Compact as its governing document. The Bradford manuscript has an interesting history of its own. Following William Bradford's death in 1657, the volume remained in his family for a few generations. They allowed the text to be used by historians and clergymen who documented the history of the colony. In the early decades of the 18th century, the book was collected by Thomas Prince and included in his New England library, which was stored in the steeple of the Old South Meeting House in Boston. During the American Revolution, though, the pages disappeared, likely taken by British regulars as they fled the city. For almost 100 years, no one knew where the original pages were. But finally, after some careful observers noticed those proverbial breadcrumbs in the mid-1800s, the book was eventually rediscovered in the Bishop of London's library at Fulham Palace in 1855. The manuscript finally returned to Massachusetts and was put into the care of the State Library in 1897. Of Plymouth Plantation is considered by many to be one of Massachusetts' greatest treasures. Since its return to the Commonwealth, the original has been carefully preserved by the State Library. Tonight, you'll hear from Plymouth Patuxet Museum's honorary trustee and best-selling author Nathaniel Philbrick, the State Librarian of Massachusetts, Albie Johnson, Head of Special Collections at the State Library, Beth Carroll Horrocks, Plymouth Patuxet Deputy Executive Director and Chief Historian, Richard Pickering, a little bit more from myself, as well as a special reading of the text. You'll learn about the origins of this project, the importance of the Bradford manuscript, and some of the choices that we made to produce this edition. We welcome you to submit questions in the Q&A section or the chat feature, whichever is easiest for you, and we will try to address as many as we can at the end of the program. So to start it off, we will hear from Albie Johnson, Beth Carroll Horrocks, and Nathaniel Philbrick. Enjoy.
I'm Albie Johnson. I'm the State Librarian of Massachusetts. And I've been at the State Library directing it for over 12 years, actually 13. Today is my anniversary. When I started at the State Library, one of the things that was most important to me is to uncover documents and share them with the general public. And the Bradford manuscript is our most prized treasure in the library. And I really wanted more of the world to know that it existed. And so one of the first things I did was try to get funding so we could digitize, conserve and digitize the publication so it could be out there in the world. And once we did that, we really wanted a larger audience. And so it's always been in the back of my mind to have it published. And with our relationship with Plymouth Patuxet, that made this project a reality. What makes this different from other editions is we decided to publish this in its original form. The clarity of the technology that it was crisp and it was readable, made the project more enticing because it would be available to and accessible to the general public. And that's really what we wanted, a really broader audience to understand and to see this document in its entirety. Each time I view this document, I see something new and different and marvelous. And so each time I look at it, it's always different and it's always an aha moment for me to see that and to make it available to other people so they can see these aha moments. And they'll probably think, like I do, that every piece, every part is the best and the most important. It really just gives me great joy that this document is going to be out there in the world and accessible to other people, so people can see the writing and make their own judgment on what the document is really about for them and for the world.
Hello everyone, my name is Beth Carroll Horrocks. I'm the head of special collections here at the State Library of Massachusetts. So we've been taking care of the Bradford Manuscript since it was returned from England in 1897. And then Governor Roger Walcott placed it with the State Library. We've been taking really good care of it. Unfortunately, for a long time in the middle of the last century, we had it on display in our reading room. Our curatorial responsibilities have changed somewhat, and we no longer have it on display to the public. But we've worked really hard to make it accessible in other ways. We had, in 2012, we got some money to have the document completely repaired and digitized, and that was done at the Northeast Document Conservation Center in Andover. So the people at NEDCC, got the original document, they treated it very carefully, they tested every page and every type of ink to make sure it could be treated. They digitized it to document its condition when they first got it. They took it apart, repaired every page, put it back together and fit it back into the same binding. We used those digital images to create several facsimiles, all of which are available here in the State Library. But we also, more importantly, use those digital images to deposit them in our digital repository so that everyone can see them. So anyone who has a computer now can see the original pages. But we wanted to do more. We wanted to create a publication that was affordable, and we let people see William Bradford's handwriting themselves. So we were very fortunate to be able to collaborate with our colleagues at Plimoth Patuxet and created this new volume for you. And we're really, really excited to make it available. So I'm going to flip through some of the pages now and show you parts of the volume that most people want to see, starting with the first few pages, which unfortunately were added by people in Massachusetts when the volume came back from England in 1897. So we wouldn't have included those now, but we really kind of removed them. Then we'll see some book plates and notes in Bradford's hand and in the hand of his family that describe what happened to the volume after Bradford's death. And then there's some really beautiful pages showing Bradford's Hebrew vocabulary. So he wanted to learn the language because apparently he thought he would be talking to God in heaven in Hebrew, and he wanted to know the original language himself. So almost at the very end of the Hebrew vocabulary is a section that's in a triangle form, and I think it's my favorite page in the whole volume. In that triangle, he explains exactly why he wants to create this vocabulary and learn the Hebrew language. Then we'll move to the first page of the narrative, and I think that page may be the most well-known of all the pages. It says right at the top, of Plimoth Plantation, which is the title we've assigned to the book. It doesn't have a real title page, and Bradford never called it that, but those words are in his handwriting, and it shows the title that everybody uses now. The next page that people want to see is the text of the Mayflower Compact. So as you know, the original compact no longer exists. There's no document with signatures, but Bradford was one of the primary architects of the text, and these words are in his handwriting. The Mayflower Compact starts with the words right here, in the name of God, amen, and it includes the reasons why they are creating this compact, and ends with the words Anno Domini 1620. The next page I want to show you is the text of what many people call a description of the first Thanksgiving. So this was in the fall of 1621, and those words start, they began now to gather in the small harvest they had. Near the back of the book are the pages that almost every Mayflower descendant wants to see, and that is the 5 pages listing all the passengers who've been on the Mayflower. So Bradford lists them by family. He tells you on the left column how many people were in that family, or including servants and children. And then he describes, in many cases, the full names of all the people. And then for us, the good part is that he describes how the family either grew or became smaller, especially because of that first winter that only half of them lived through. So it's a great source of detail for people who want to trace their family genealogy.
Well, Bradford's original manuscript was seeing that in the flesh, so to speak, was really one of the highlights of my research and writing life. I mean, this is a manuscript that I had come through by reading an edition of it, and it was an absolutely central text for my book, Mayflower. And I was long in the research when it became clear that could have the opportunity to actually hold the original document in my hands. And I've held original documents in the past, and it's always kind of like channeling the history in a kind of Star Trekian way. It's there, but this was different. This calfskin book, handwritten by William Bradford, looks like it was completed yesterday. It is in such great shape. And it's really poignant because in my research, I was dealing with a lot of 17th century letters and documents, and most of the handwriting is almost indecipherable to 20th century and 21st century eyes, but not Bradford's. I think it kind of reflects who the guy was. I mean, he printed it in a very writerly way. The document just has an absolute beauty about it that was breathtaking. And then what really made it poignant for me was you could see where towards the end of his life, he was writing out Hebrew in an attempt to learn that language so that he could have an even more direct association with the Bible, with the Word of God. Here in this manuscript in which he recorded the history of Plymouth Colony, he is, working out his own spiritual quest, and it just made me appreciate the man, the time, in a way that I really could have never imagined if I hadn't had the chance to hold this manuscript in my hand.
So when Mr. Philbrick's book, Mayflower, many of you probably read it yourself, appeared in 2006, it brought a new interest to Plymouth Colony history and our museum. Visitation to the area spiked as people came to see the places he described. That book also sparked a great friendship with Mr. Philbrick and his family, and we are very grateful to him for sharing his time with us tonight. You also might notice the word facsimile a lot tonight. A facsimile is an exact copy of a manuscript, and our edition is a facsimile as it presents Bradford's original handwritten history through these high-quality photos of the book. In the last segment, you saw Beth point out the Mayflower Compact in Bradford's original handwriting. And I wanted to let you know about a recent video we made at the museum that talks about the Mayflower history of this influential government document. We did it in a video as well as a podcast episode. And these materials can be found on our website and through all our social media channels: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, SoundCloud, and Apple Podcasts. So if you're interested in more about the Mayflower Compact and its history, I encourage you to check those out. I also want to take a moment now to recognize Plymouth Patuxet Executive Director Ellie Donovan, whose vision and leadership guided us through this project, as well as all that we do at the museum every day. I also want to acknowledge Rachel Perez, the incredibly talented graphic designer who brought this project to life. Rachel's design vividly brings Bradford's text into the 21st century, reminding us that we still have much to learn from the history today. Next, in the next segment, we'll actually hear a bit more from me as I describe some of the editorial choices that we made on this project and how we put this edition together and what makes ours a bit different. Hi, I'm Tom Begley. I'm a special project writer at Plymouth Patuxet Museums. I'm really excited to be able to talk to you about some of the editorial choices that went into the making of this new version of William Bradford's of Plimoth Plantation. So when the State Library approached us for this project, we gladly accepted, because this is what we do here every day at Plymouth Patuxet Museums. We use the primary sources to inform our historical interpretation on our living history exhibits. This new edition of Plymouth Plantation brings Bradford's original handwritten history to the general public in printed form for the first time in over a century. Since the book was rediscovered in London in 1855, there have been several scholarly editions, transcriptions of the text to help us contextualize the history and understand it in a broader scope of English and early American history. What makes our edition different is that it's not our edition, it is Bradford's history. This is Bradford's original handwritten history with very minimal changes done to the original manuscript. The Plymouth Plantation is one of Massachusetts, one of the nation's greatest treasures, and the State Library of Massachusetts takes very careful measures to preserve that book so that it can survive for another 400 years. But that means that everyday people don't necessarily get the opportunity to hold that actual manuscript in their hands. So our book, the pages are actually cut to match the size of Bradford's original manuscript in the State Library. And it gives the reader that sense of as close as they can possibly get to actually holding those pages in their hands. The State Library of Massachusetts and Plymouth Patuxet Museums wanted to keep any additional information added to the book at a minimum. So we provided a very brief, concise, introductory matter that will help the reader dive into Bradford's history. That includes some introductory essays, as well as Plymouth Patuxet Museum's key to reading 17th century handwriting. We made very few editorial choices when putting this book project together, but our goal at the root of it was to present the history as close to that as which Bradford left at his death. Some of the editorial choices that we made in this book project include moving the notes that Bradford didn't write to the back of the book, removing blank pages so as to reduce the page count overall, and then also providing further reading suggestions so that people, after you engage with the handwritten history, can learn more, as well as a detailed index to help the reader navigate the text directly, to find passages that are interesting to each individual reader. As an editor on this project, as I approached the index, I started to realize how editors and authors of other book projects have to make a judgment choice when it comes to the index. So when we approached this project with Plymouth Plantation, we looked at the text again and looked at places where we could add, from our perspective as a public history institution and having the benefit of decades of research prior, to find places where we could add new context to the Bradford history. In Bradford's passenger list, even for those who came across Mayflower, he would list, for example, William Mullins and his wife. But we know his wife's name. We know his wife is Alice. So in our index, we put her full name. My favorite part of this new edition of Plimoth Plantation is having the opportunity to see the thought process of William Bradford as he's writing his history. When you hold these pages close to you, you'll see the way the ink appears on the page, how Bradford crams in little notes over his lines to add context to what he's writing, the way he scratched out words because he thought of a better way to say something. It's these moments where you actually see the man writing the history. It's not just printed words on a page. It is a person who lived and experienced and recorded their history so that we can learn from it centuries later. And I know that's what you as the reader will experience when you see this as well. This is an authentic experience, a way to get to not only better know history, but to get to better know a man who wrote that history down for us. Couldn't have said it better myself. You see some of the editorial choices that we were able to make on this book project. And when you get a chance to get this book for yourself, you'll notice something very special as you hold it. You'll experience authenticity. This is Bradford's handwriting. To me, it's like buying Elvis on vinyl, right? That was the medium he worked in. It was how he intended it to be heard. Reading Bradford's text for yourself is like dropping the needle into the groove on a record. You can almost imagine, even hear his quill scratching the paper as he recorded this history. Reading it creates a truly unique experience for the viewer. Plimoth Patuxet's relationship with the State Library grew in part out of a previous collaboration on the PBS American Experience documentary, The Pilgrims, which was made by acclaimed filmmaker Rick Burns. In 2013, our museum worked closely with Steeplechase Films throughout filming and introduced them to our colleagues at the library, who provided access to the original manuscript for their filming. In this next segment, you'll see some of those clips, and you'll hear from Richard Pickering on what we can learn from Bradford through this book and how we bring it to life at Plimoth Patuxet Museums. We'll also see a special reading of the book from Plimoth Patuxet's Joshua Bernard, who will read in a Yorkshire English dialect, the one that Bradford spoke himself. Josh is younger than Bradford was when he wrote A Plimoth Plantation, but through Josh's voice, Bradford's words will come to life in his original dialect. I hope you enjoy it.
I am Richard Pickering, Deputy Executive Director and Chief Historian at Plimoth Patuxet Museums. Colonial sources are studied, but William Bradford's of Plimoth Plantation is actually read. The chronicle that he wrote about Plymouth is filled with wonderful narrative, gorgeous characterization, and drama. It's a book that still lives. And for Plimoth Patuxet Museums, essentially it's our Bible. It's the masterwork that we return to again and again when we recreate the 17th century. It is the Commonwealth of Massachusetts treasure because no other colony has a record as human, as deep, as detailed as Bradford's of Plimoth Plantation. And it allows us as a museum to recreate the past with a 360-degree detail that can rarely be done elsewhere. Josh Bernard is about to read the opening sentences of Plimoth Plantation. Listen for William Bradford's commitment to simplicity, clarity, and being truthful. Within the period, there is a strong suspicion of purple or overly descriptive language. Simple language expressed to the heart, and that is what Bradford is doing with his opening words. You will also hear Josh read a section of the book that sometimes is referred to as O Sacred Bond, when William Bradford, as an older man, looked backward on his younger self. You can see how, as a writer, he went back to the early pages, reread them, and responded to them by turning some of them over and writing his feelings in the moment. And in the instance that you are about to hear, he is regretting the breakup of a community that he so wanted to have all spirits and hearts knit together. But over time, they fell asunder, and some walked away from the work that they established in 1620.
Of Plymouth Plantation. And first of the occasion and inducements thereunto, the which that I may truly unfold, I must begin at the very root and rise of the same, the which I shall endeavour to manifest in a plain style with singular regard unto the simple truth in all things, at least as near as my slender judgment can attain the same. O sacred bond, whilst inviolably preserved, how sweet and precious were the fruits that flowed from the same. But when this fidelity decayed, then their ruin approached. Oh, that these ancient members had not died or been dissipated, if it had been the will of God, or else that this holy care and constant faithfulness had still lived, and remained with those that survived, and were in times afterwards added unto them. But alas, that subtle serpent hath slyly wound in himself under fair pretences of necessity and the like, to untwist these sacred bonds and tied, and as it were insensibly by degrees to dissolve, or in a great measure to weaken the same. I have been happy in my first times to see, and with much comfort to enjoy, the blessed fruits of this sweet communion. But it is now a party of misery in old age, to find and feel the decay and want thereof in a great measure, and with grief and sorrow of heart to lament and bewail the same. And for others' warning and admonition and my own humiliation, do I here note the same.
Thank you for being with us. And I want to assure you that time travel is possible. With your own copy of Plymouth Plantation, you can go on a journey to 400 years ago. No editor coming between you and the writer. A one-on-one conversation, uninterrupted, emotionally intense, and inspiring. One that touches both the head, with what we can learn from the people 4 centuries ago, and the heart, when we experience the risk that they took in establishing our nation. I'm sure you will enjoy it.
So again, on behalf of Plymouth Patuxet Museums and the State Library of Massachusetts, thank you for joining us tonight to learn about this exciting project. We'll be putting the link to more information on the book in the chat, so feel free to click on that to explore a bit more about what the book project came about and to get your own copy of it. We do have time for a couple of questions. So I'll go into the chat in the Q&A feature here, and I will pull a couple out for us to talk about. So one question I have is about, did the Pilgrims write any other documents? And yes, actually, in fact, we're very fortunate that the Pilgrims wrote quite a lot, actually. They wrote down a lot of what was happening in the early days and throughout the colony's history. Two key texts to check out would be what's called Mort's Relation, which tells the events in the colony throughout the first year, from their arrival in New England through, including the famous account of what is the first Thanksgiving. Additionally, another great one to look at is the Good News from New England, which comes a few years later and really tells a lot about some of the early relationships with local indigenous communities. So those are two key ones to look at, and there are many other ones that you can find as well. Another question we have is, what, if any, relationship is there between this volume and the 1898 book entitled Bradford's History of Plymouth Plantation, published by Wright and Potter. Well, the Wright and Potter version of the book was printed right after the manuscript returned to Massachusetts. So the book was published in 1898, the manuscript came back in 1897. So what's different from our book and that is that ours is a facsimile. So ours is actually the images, the picture of Bradford's handwriting. So you can actually see his handwriting itself. That book is a transcription. So that in that book, they actually type up all of Bradford's words. So you don't get to see his handwriting, you still see his words. And it's one of the first books that are printed once the manuscript returns. So where may we purchase copies? This sounds amazing. Thank you. Yes. The link again will be in the chat very, very soon. Follow that link. There will be a follow-up email as well that will go out to all of you with information about the book, as well as some of the resources that I mentioned in today's lecture. So that is there. If you go to our website, plymouth.org, you can see all of the information right there on the main page. Very easy to find. You can purchase them. All these books are available online in our online shop. Okay, what day did the Pilgrims first come and land in Plymouth, not Cape Cod? And what date is that in our calendar today? This is a great question. So we're getting very close to the actual 400th anniversary of when the Pilgrims first arrived at Plymouth. That was December 11th, 1621. That is in the old style calendar, the calendar that the Pilgrims followed. If you convert in what's sort of traditionally been observed to the new style calendar, that would be December 21st, 2020, you would look at it. But at Plymouth Patuxet Museums, we tell the story from the old style calendar. We use the old style calendar because that's what they wrote down. That's what they shared with us. And we find that we don't, people in history, when they study history, don't tend to convert every date from before calendar switch. So yeah, that's a great question because I like talking about the history of the calendars. And I'll just briefly mention that so England doesn't recognize the switch to the Gregorian calendar until 1752. So all the early colonial days are still using that old style calendar. So there are other famous events in history that don't convert. For example, the Guy Fawkes Day, the November 5th, 1605. It's still recognized on November 5th. It was never converted to new style. So we like to stick with the old style. That's what the Pilgrims wrote down. But December 11th, 1621 is when the Pilgrims arrived at Plymouth. Can you tell the story of how the original manuscript got lost in England? There's not much to really add to it. Once we know when it disappears and when it leaves, so when it leaves Boston, we don't really know its story of what happened in England and how it actually ended up in the Bishop of London's library. It's this blank sort of piece, almost 100-year period in the book's history that we just don't really know how it got there. The way it was found was there were some citations in a couple of books that very astute observers noticed, and they happened to realize like that this book must only be referring to this lost Bradford manuscript that had only survived in pieces really throughout the years. And sure enough, they were able to track it down. So one other question that's here in the chat is asking about our name. You will have noticed that our name is Plymouth Patuxet Museums, but you might have known us as Plymouth Plantation. And if you haven't seen the answer, if you haven't seen some of the news, about why we made that choice, our board of trustees, recently voted to change our name to Plymouth Patuxet Museums. This exciting shift for us better reflects the full story at the core of our educational mission, which includes both the history and culture of the indigenous people of this region, as well as the history and culture of the English colonists. So for now, we will roll out the new name in phases and with something more formal to come in market in 2021. So please stay tuned for more information regarding that. I think I saw one more question. I think I have time for Sorry, a lot of comments have come in. Thank you for your support. Someone asked, given that today's youth cannot read or have some trouble with 20th century cursive, how do students react to reading 17th century writing? Well, I can tell you that that's a very popular part of our educational programming, is that we actually do programs with schools where they can write in quill and ink and practice in reading and looking at 17th century writing. In one of the videos, I believe we mentioned that we included in this book a guide to 17th century handwriting. And that is the guide that we use in our programming every year. So this is something that we use with school children. It's very effective so that people who are not familiar with 17th century handwriting, and I admit it can be tricky at times and can look odd, but Bradford had an extremely neat and clear penmanship. And with this little handwriting guide, you can, anybody really, can better engage with the text. So I think that's all the time I really have to answer questions today. But you can always reach out and know more about this project through our website, plymouth.org, through the State Library's website, where they have a lot of resources about the history of the manuscript and what they've done to care for the book in the last, since 1897. So again, thank you very much for being here and your support of our missions of Plymouth Patuxet Museums and the State Library of Massachusetts. I hope you enjoy this book as much as we did putting it together. We hope to hopefully see you at the museum very soon. And I hope that you all have a happy and healthy Thanksgiving this year. Thank you.